In a packed movie theater, a sudden threat turned a glamorous premiere into a scene of panic. Keanu Reeves stepped in front of Sandra Bullock, shielding her as chaos broke out around them. In the stunned silence that followed, the audience realized they had just witnessed their on-screen hero become a real-life protector. Let me take you back to a night when the biggest thing on anyone's mind was the smell of popcorn and the hope of a good movie. I was there, close enough to see the flicker of the projector on the ceiling, and close enough to witness how, in a single heartbeat, everything in that cinema changed. It was the premiere of a new action film, the kind of night that makes the air feel charged before the lights even go down. Outside, the red carpet had already seen its flashes and questions, all that noise of fame that looks glamorous from far away and strangely tiring up close. By the time we were seated, the outside world felt shut out, like the thick doors of the cinema had sealed us into our own little universe. People whispered, laughed too loudly, balanced sodas and nachos, their faces washed in the pre-show ads playing on the massive screen. Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock slipped in with a quietness that didn't match their names. There was a polite wave as people noticed them, a ripple of excited murmurs rolling through the rows, but they didn't play it up. Keanu nodded to someone who called his name, that small, almost shy smile people always talk about, the one that makes it seem like he still can't quite believe anyone recognizes him. Sandra, in a simple dark dress, walked with that mix of grace and goofiness she's known for, laughing softly when she nearly tripped on the step between rows, and steadying herself with a hand on the seat in front of her instead of anyone's arm. They chose seats among everyone else, not in some special balcony. No bodyguards blocking the view, no ropes. Just two familiar faces surrounded by strangers clutching tickets and dreams of 2 hours of escape. A young usher, barely 20, tried to act professional as he guided them to their row, but his hands were shaking. Sandra noticed and whispered something that made him laugh, the kind of laugh that lets you breathe again. Keanu thanked him like he'd just done the most important job in the world. Around me, phones came up for quick, blurry photos, but it was different from the usual hungry energy of people trying to snatch a piece of celebrity. There was a kind of softness in the room. People were careful, almost respectful. Maybe it was the way Keanu kept looking around, not like a king inspecting his kingdom, but like a guest hoping he wasn't taking up too much space. Maybe it was the way Sandra leaned close to the woman next to her, an older fan with trembling hands, and listened to her like there was nothing else happening in the world. The trailers started, and the theater dimmed to that almost sacred darkness that makes everyone equal. In the glow of the screen, you could see faces transform, bored, excited, nervous, tired. The older man in the front row rubbing his eyes, the teenage girl clutching a notebook she hoped to get signed later, the couple in the back arguing quietly but still sitting shoulder to shoulder. I remember thinking how strange it was that so many different lives had all folded into these same seats, breathing the same warm, buttery air. About 10 minutes into the film, just as the first big action sequence began, I saw it, small at first, barely more than a shadow of tension at the edge of my vision. A man near the side aisle stood up too fast, his seat snapping upright with a sharp metallic thud that cut through the movie's soundtrack. His silhouette wavered in the beam of the projector, tall and unsteady, his hands moving in a way I couldn't quite read. People in his row glanced up, annoyed at first, then confused when he didn't simply shuffle down the aisle or crouch apologetically. He wasn't going anywhere, he was shaking. From my seat, the screen's light caught the side of his face. Eyes wide, jaw clenched, chest heaving like he couldn't get enough air. Someone whispered, "Hey, sit down," in that irritated tone people use when they think the worst thing that can happen in a cinema is having their view blocked. But the man didn't respond. His right hand disappeared into his jacket, and for a split second the entire world around me seemed to narrow to that single, trembling movement. The sound of the movie faded against the pounding in my ears. A mother pulled her child closer. A soda slipped from someone's grip and rolled, sticky and forgotten, under the seats. A low murmur rose, thin and uncertain, like the first gust of wind before a storm. I saw a few people reach for their phones, not to film, but to call someone, anyone, without even knowing what they'd say. 2 rows down, Keanu's head turned first, his body going completely still in that way some people do when their instincts kick in. Sandra followed his gaze, her laughter from a moment before gone, her expression sharpening into quiet alertness. The man near the aisle now had both hands inside his jacket, shoulders tense, the outline of something hard pressed against the fabric. A woman beside him stiffened, her breath catching loud enough that I heard it over the movie's roaring soundtrack. And in that fragile, breaking moment, between the flicker of fiction on the screen and the very real fear crawling through the dark, Keanu pushed himself up from his seat, stepping toward Sandra with a calm, deliberate motion that made time feel like it was stretching thin, just as the cinema fell into a silence, so deep you could almost hear 100 heartbeats holding on to the next second. Keanu didn't shout, didn't make a scene. He just moved. One second he was a shadow in his seat, the next he was standing in the narrow space between the rows, his body angled so that he was half facing Sandra, half facing the man in the aisle. His arm went out, almost casually as if to steady himself, but it landed just in front of Sandra's shoulder, a quiet, unmistakable shield. Around us, the air went tight. Nobody breathed normally anymore. It was all shallow pulls and held lungs. On the screen, cars exploded and glass shattered in slow motion, but the people in the cinema had stopped watching. The sound from the movie crashed against the silence inside the room like waves against a closed door. Somewhere in the back, a baby started crying, that high, thin wail that always makes adults look at each other in helpless apology. The man by the aisle still hadn't taken his hands out of his jacket. His shoulders shook. He looked less like a villain and more like someone whose world had already ended before he walked into that theater. The woman beside him pressed herself flat against her seat, whispering something that sounded like a prayer. A teenage boy 2 rows behind lifted his phone, not to film, but to dial. His thumb hovered over the screen, trembling so much he couldn't hit the numbers. Keanu's voice came low and steady, just loud enough to cut through the chaos on the screen. "Hey," he said, like he was talking to someone who just dropped their keys, not someone who might be holding a weapon. "My friend, can you look at me for a second?" Sandra's profile was half-lit by the flicker from the movie. I saw her jaw tighten, saw her eyes locked on the man's back. Her hands were clenched on the armrests, but she didn't scream, didn't lunge, didn't pull Keanu back the way anyone would have forgiven her for doing. Instead, she shifted just enough that if anything happened, she wouldn't be the one he shielded alone. She'd be right there with him. The man in the aisle jerked his head toward Keanu's voice, blinking like he was waking up from somewhere far away. For a moment he just stared, confusion crossing his face. It was a strange thing to witness, recognition fighting through terror. You could almost see the thought forming behind his eyes. Why is this guy talking to me? Why does his face look familiar? Why now? Someone a few rows down started to rise, maybe with the wild idea of tackling him, of being a hero. Keanu lifted his free hand just slightly, palm open, a small signal that said, "Don't." It wasn't dramatic, but somehow the man stopped, suspended in half-stand, then sank back into his seat, eyes wide. "I'm not going to come any closer if you don't want me to," Keanu said quietly. "But you're scaring a lot of people, man, and I don't think that's who you are." It was a simple sentence, but something in the way he said it, like he was stating a fact, not a hope, seemed to reach the man. His shoulders slumped a fraction, like a knot inside him loosened just a little. He swallowed hard, Adam's apple bobbing, and for the first time we saw his hands emerge from his jacket. They were clutching something dark and solid, pressed tight against his chest. In the strobing light of the movie, it looked sickeningly like a gun. A chorus of gasps rose and died in the same instant. Someone dropped their phone. Somewhere to my left, I heard a soft sob break free. The man's knuckles were white around the object, his fingers rigid with desperation. He looked down at it as if even he wasn't sure what he was about to do. Keanu didn't flinch. If he was afraid, it didn't show in his face. His eyes stayed on the man's, not on the thing in his hands. "What happened?" Keanu asked, voice softer now, like they were the only two in the room. "Something happened to you? I can see it. Talk to me, please." The man's mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out at first. Then, in a hoarse whisper, like every word was cutting his throat on the way out, he said, They don't even know I'm here." He said it like it was the most unbearable truth in the world. A part of me wanted him to scream, to explain, to say something that made this all make sense. Another part of me wanted to crawl under my seat and disappear. Around us, people were frozen between fight and flight, caught in that paralyzing third option. Stay absolutely still and hope the moment passes you by. Keanu nodded slowly, as if he'd been expecting an answer like that, as if invisibility was more dangerous than any weapon. "I see you," he said. "Right now I see you, and so does she." He tilted his head slightly toward Sandra, not taking his eyes off the man. "And all these people, you're not alone in this room, even if it feels that way." The man's throat worked again. Tears glimmered in his eyes, not yet fallen. His grip tightened on the dark object against his chest, and for one unbearable heartbeat, it looked like he was about to raise it, not toward himself, but out into the crowded theater, into the field of soft, breathing silhouettes. He drew in a sharp, ragged breath. His hands began to lift. The dark shape rising with them, and the world inside that room seemed to tilt on its axis. Every instinct in me screamed to get down, to crawl, to disappear behind the seat in front. The muscles in my legs were already coiling to drop when something unbelievable happened. Keanu stepped further into the aisle instead. He put himself fully between the stranger and our row, his shoulder now the only thing blocking Sandra from that shaking set of hands. The screen behind him flooded his figure with cold blue light, turning him into a moving silhouette with his palms raised, fingers spread wide to show he held nothing. It should have looked like a movie scene, but it didn't. It looked raw and awkward and terrifyingly real. The object in the man's grip cleared the edge of his jacket, and all doubt vanished. It was a gun. A wave of pure animal panic washed through the audience. Some people ducked instinctively, spines folding. Others froze, eyes wide, mouths open but soundless. A chair snapped back so hard it rattled the entire row. Someone whispered, "Oh God," over and over, each repetition thinner than the last. A child whimpered, immediately shushed by trembling hands. Eerily, Keanu didn't look at the gun. His gaze stayed locked on the man's face, as if the weapon were just some unfortunate detail at the edge of the frame. His voice remained low, steady, quieter than the movie, but somehow cutting right through its soundtrack. "All right," he said gently. "I see it. I see you're hurting, but I also see your hands shaking. You don't want to do this." The man's lips pulled back in something that wasn't quite a snarl and wasn't quite a sob. His eyes were wild and wet, darting from shadow to shadow, from the luminous screen to the hundreds of silhouettes hunched in their seats. His finger hovered near the trigger, not quite touching, but close enough to turn my blood to ice. "They never listen," he choked out. "They never listen until it's too late." Sandra spoke then, her voice hoarse but clear. She leaned slightly past Keanu's shoulder, staying low but visible. "We're listening," she said. "Right now, I promise you we are listening." The man flinched at the sound of her, recognition flaring and then twisting into something like shame. For a fleeting second, he seemed less like a threat and more like someone whose pain had finally found a crack to escape through. "You have everything," he spat, but the words broke in the middle. You have everything. They walk past me every day like I'm a stain on the sidewalk. I lost my job. My wife took our son and left. I'm nothing. I come here just to sit in the dark where no one can see me, and they still don't see me." His voice cracked on that last word, turning it into a jagged sound that hurt to hear. He lifted the gun higher, not aiming carefully at anyone, just holding it out like proof of his existence. A few people started to rise in the back, maybe to run, maybe to rush him, torn between terror and some desperate urge to act. A sob shook the air from somewhere behind us. "Look at me now," he said louder. "Now they see me." Keanu took a slow breath, shoulders rising and falling. "You know what they see right now?" he asked. "They see a man who is suffering so much he thinks this is the only way anyone will notice. That's not a monster. That's a broken heart with a dangerous tool in its hand." He took half a step closer. I watched Sandra's hand shoot out, catching the back of his jacket, not to yank him away but to anchor him like she was silently saying, "I'm here. I'm right behind you." Her eyes glistened, but her jaw was set. "Don't come closer," the man shouted, the gun wobbling. "Don't you dare, I swear to God I'll—" "You'll what?" Keanu's voice didn't harden. If anything, it softened. "You'll ruin every chance you still have to see your son again. You'll give the world one more reason to pretend your pain is something to be afraid of instead of something to care about." That hit, you could see it. The man blinked like the floor under him had given way. His grip faltered, and for just an instant the barrel dipped. His chest rose and fell in harsh bursts. "How do you know anything about losing someone?" the man rasped. Keanu's eyes, even from where I sat, looked suddenly older, tired. "More than you think," he said quietly. "Enough to stand here anyway." A whisper of motion at the back of the theater caught my eye. An usher on the phone ducked low, mouthing, "There's a gun, there's a gun." Two people were pointing, faces white. I saw one man tensing like a coiled spring, ready to tackle, judging distance, angles, courage versus chance. And then, cutting through the thick, trembling quiet like a blade, someone closer to the exit cracked. A woman's voice shrieked, "He's got a gun." The sound shattered whatever fragile balance had been holding. The man with the weapon jerked violently at the scream, his arm swinging off its uncertain line. Another audience member lunged from the side, desperate fingers snatching for the gun. In that split-second collision of fear and intent, the stranger's hand clenched by reflex. The blast tore through the theater, a single, deafening roar that slammed into my chest and stole the breath from my lungs. Just as Keanu moved in one sharp, perfect motion, driving Sandra down behind the seats and throwing his own body over hers. The flash still burned on my retinas when the echo of the shot finally died, leaving a ringing, terrible silence in its wake. For a moment, there was nothing but the high, electric whine in my ears and the smell of burnt powder drifting through the dark. It felt like the whole theater was holding its breath, waiting to find out what the sound had carved into the world. Someone screamed. Another voice shouted, "Stay down, stay down." Seats rattled as people ducked behind them, trying to make themselves as small as possible. Somewhere, a child sobbed uncontrollably, the raw panic of it slicing through the stunned quiet. My eyes snapped to Keanu and Sandra. They were on the floor between the rows, half hidden by the seats. I'd seen him move a split second before the gun went off, one arm sweeping around Sandra's shoulders, the other pushing against the back of the seat in front of them to force them both down. He was sprawled over her now, his body an imperfect but undeniable shield. One of her hands was pressed flat against his back, not pushing him away, just holding on. On the far wall near the screen, a fresh, jagged hole gaped in the acoustic paneling, a dark starburst where the bullet had punched through. Small pieces of fabric and foam drifted lazily down like dust caught in a projector beam. It took a few seconds for my brain to accept it. The shot had gone wide. By a miracle or a trembling accident, no one had been hit. The man with the gun stared at that hole as if it had appeared on another planet. His arm hung in the air, frozen mid-swing, the weapon still in his grip. The person who had tried to grab it backed away on hands and knees, eyes huge with shock. For the first time since he'd stood up, the stranger looked utterly horrified by his own hands. I didn't," he stammered. I didn't mean. The sound of running footsteps pounded down the aisle. Two security guards in plain clothes rushed forward, a man and a woman, faces tight with focus and fear. One yelled, "Drop it! Drop the gun!" Their voices cracked through the room like whips. Everything seemed to slow. The stranger's fingers clenched around the grip again, knuckles white, but there was no aggression left in him. There was only shock and despair. He turned in a small, lost half-circle, taking in the cowering audience, the crying child, the hole in the wall. His chest hitched once sharply, and then he looked at Keanu and Sandra, still on the floor, still too close to him. Keanu lifted his head just enough to look back, his body still braced over Sandra's. "It's okay," he called to the security guards, voice rough from the blast but steady. "Don't rush him, he's scared. Everyone just breathe." The woman guard glanced at him with disbelief. "Sir, move away, now." He shook his head the tiniest motion. "If we all rush him, someone's going to get hurt. Let me talk." Beside him, Sandra shifted, pushing up on one elbow despite his weight. Her face was pale, but her eyes were fiercely clear. "Please," she added, looking at the guards, "just give us a second. He didn't aim at anyone. He lost control. That's not the same thing." It was crazy what they were asking. Every nerve in my body wanted the gun on the ground, kicked far away, locked in a metal box. But somehow the quiet certainty in their voices threaded its way through the chaos. The guards didn't lower their guard, but they hesitated. The man with the gun sank back against an empty seat, his knees giving out. The barrel drooped toward the sticky floor, his arm too exhausted to keep it up. Tears finally broke free, cutting clean tracks down his cheeks. "I just wanted someone to see me," he whispered. "I wasn't gonna. I thought if they were scared, maybe they'd remember me, just once." Keanu slowly eased himself off Sandra, helping her sit up. He stayed low, hands open, movements measured like he was taming a wild animal that was mostly afraid of its own reflection. "We see you," he said again, more firmly this time. "We see you now, not because you're holding that thing, because you're shaking, because you're hurting, because you almost made a mistake you wouldn't be able to take back." The man's shoulders folded in on themselves. The gun clattered from his fingers to the carpeted step with a dull, heavy thud that sliced through the tension like a knife. Instantly, the male guard moved, kicking it away in one practiced motion, sending it skidding under the front row. No one cheered. The relief was too raw, too mixed with leftover fear. Instead, there was this strange, fragile quiet, like the air after a violent storm when you're still not sure if there's another wave coming. The stranger slid down until he was sitting on the floor, knees up, face hidden in his hands. He sobbed, loud, ugly, shuddering sobs that bounced off the walls and made more than one person in the audience press their lips together to keep from breaking with him. A middle-aged woman near the front glared at him, anger finally catching up with relief. "You could have killed us," she spat. "My daughter is here, she's 12. You think this is how you get noticed?" He flinched at her words like they were physical blows. His voice, when it came, was barely audible. I know, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I've lost everything. I didn't know what else to do." Keanu shifted, turning just enough so he could look from the man to the woman in the front. "He's not asking you to excuse it," he said gently. "None of us are. There are going to be consequences. There should be. But right now, in this room, before all that, maybe we don't throw the last piece of him away." Sandra touched the stranger's shoulder very lightly, like she was asking permission just by the softness of her fingers. When he didn't pull away, she rested her hand there. "My career was built in rooms like this," she said quietly. "In front of audiences like this. But I know what it's like to feel like nobody hears you when you're hurting. You chose a terrible way to ask for help, but you did ask. That has to mean something." He lifted his head slowly, eyes swollen and red, and actually looked at them for the first time. There was disbelief there and confusion and a raw, childlike question. "Why didn't you just run?" The obvious answer, because they're famous, because cameras would catch it, because they're brave, hung unspoken in the air. But that wasn't what appeared in Keanu's expression. Something older, heavier, moved behind his eyes. He held the man's gaze and answered in a voice that was almost a whisper, but somehow reached every corner of the room. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything and have no one stay," he said. "And when I saw your face, I recognized that look. I couldn't walk away from it, not again." The words landed with a weight you could feel, pressing down on the hush that followed, leaving the whole theater suspended between what had almost happened and the deeper story that was only just beginning to show itself.